Welcome to UNCAGED, a show that celebrates thought leadership from today's top business leaders. The program provides a voice to amazing executives like Jarie Bolander today from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. We have Jarie Bolander on the show today. Jarie has a really interesting background. We're going to cover a couple of different things today. He is the owner of JSY PR and Marketing. He is also the author of the Entrepreneur Ethos, as well as the host of the Entrepreneur Ethos podcast. And I think, Jarie, there were like 4 or 5 other things there that we're going to cover off during the conversation today.
Yeah, exactly. I've got so many jobs. Sometimes I don't know.
Yeah, so Jarie's doing a lot of cool stuff, and we're going to cover all that stuff off today. But Jarie, before we get into some of those things, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Yeah, well, Bant, great to be on the show. Thanks so much for having me on. And what I always like to say is that I'm an engineer by training, but an entrepreneur by nature. And so I sort of started out as an electrical engineering major in college in Silicon Valley, got out of college and immediately went to a startup because I'm in Silicon Valley. I got to go to a startup. Why? Anyone that's seen Silicon Valley, there's startups everywhere, right? We just go hang out in someone's garage and build the next billion-dollar company. I mean, it happens all the time, right?
Of course.
I mean, it's like
so easy.
It's so easy. Yeah, so easy. So, 6 or 7 of those startups later, some successful, some complete disasters. I found myself doing PR and marketing and storytelling of all things, which I never in a billion years, honestly, thought I'd ever do. And I did that because I met a girl. Her name was Jane, and she ran a publicist company, what I run now, JSY PR and Marketing, for professional athletes. And
wow.
Yeah, so she used to be a publicist for Yao Ming, Amari Sotomayor, Carmelo Anthony. She worked with Marshawn Lynch. I mean, all these top players. And so I met her, we fell in love, got married, and then she got leukemia. Oh. And during the time she got leukemia, she clearly couldn't go out in the world. So she's like, well, buddy, you need to run my company. Yeah. So I stepped up and started to run JSY PR and Marketing. And then almost 4 years ago, she died. And ever since, I have been running this company somewhat in her honor, but also because I was getting really good at telling stories.
Right.
And I found that the most important thing that a company can do, it doesn't matter the company. To me, the best story wins. And as I've been kind of learning this and kind of, of course, grieving and healing myself through this pretty traumatic experience that a lot of people, unfortunately will have to go through at least once in their life, I realized that I need to help people tell better stories. So that's why I started the podcast based on the book. The book, The Entrepreneur Ethos, was actually inspired by Jane. She never got to read the full thing, but she said, there's all these everyone in B as an entrepreneur is just a tall white guy. I think you need to start championing, that this is something for everyone. Because she was, of course, a 5'2" Asian entrepreneur in the sports industry, which you can imagine the stories she had, which were just amazing. So I decided to continue on, put the engineering hat away, and try to tell better stories, help clients and help companies. And
well, it's kind of an interesting one, Jarie, because I mean, obviously, firstly, it's always tough to hear when someone loses a loved one, and certainly one that's so elaborate in your case, which is kind of a connection with your business and everything. I can only imagine the pain that you've gone through, and really kind of where you're building this from, which is it's really quite special. But I mean, when you're thinking about storytelling today in the digital context, strangely enough, kind of your background from engineering all the way through to all the startups that you've been involved in to now really working more directly on that messaging, all seems to kind of come together, I would say, with where storytelling is going today. So tell me a little bit about what you're working on today in that area.
Yeah, so that's 100% true. I mean, what's interesting is that you see all the data and stats on like digital ads and, all of these platforms, social media, and being, influencers, and just all of this. I don't know. It's a lot of noise, right? And you can also see a lot of stats that say, well, all those clicks that you've been getting on them ads, them's probably bots, or at least some of them are bots, right? And so I always say that when you spend ad dollars, you basically have a bad story tax. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, Jarie, you need ads. And I'm like, I'm not saying you don't need ads, but what I think, and I fully believe, which is fully backed up by our evolutionary process as humans, is that we need to understand our story, get our story straight. And we actually need to map out the customer journey, the prospect journey. We need to know, like, what's this full through line of our entire brand before we actually launch it. And the reason is because there's always going to be holes and gaps in our story if we don't think about it. And this is what the story grid taught me, because I'm a certified story grid editor, and it's basically how to write better books, like how to make sure your story works, right? And when I went to the class, which Jane actually bought me for my birthday, because my birthday was literally yesterday. So,
wow, happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. And
21, 22, something like that?
Yeah. Plus or minus, 40. No, I'm kidding. I'm 50. So, but what's funny is that, so she bought me this thing for my birthday. I go there and I learn all about storytelling because I wanted to write another book. I was writing the entrepreneur ethos. I really was like enthralled by this idea that story had structure. You could have objective measures on how well a story worked. And for my engineering mind, this was like gold, because I would go to these writing classes and hang out with authors, and they'd be like, oh man, it just doesn't work for me. Like, your story just doesn't, and I'm like, tell me how to fix it. Like, I'm an engineer. I fix problems. I want to know, like, I want to be better, but just don't say, go read the classics. Go, like, I'll do that. But like, I need to know why this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And when I saw the story grid and I heard Sean Coyne speak and Tim Grahl, who run it. Sean Coyne's the editor of Stephen Pressfield, who, if any of you know, wrote The War of Art, is the best book on creativity I've ever read. And so I'm like, wow, I think this guy has gone to something.
Yeah.
So fast forward, almost, it was actually 4 years. Yeah, that first seminar was 4 years this month. I started working on this thing called the story funnel. And the story funnel is about how to nail your next launch without wasting investor money and annoying your customers. And it's all based fundamentally on storytelling. At each stage of the process, from prospects to customers to advocates. And so I'm really thrilled about that, because finally, as you said, like, oh, engineering, story, company, it's all kind of coming together in the Venn diagram. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, I actually come from the world where I've been involved with kind of marketing, communications throughout my whole career, and I would say that I think about, and I guess I've been on the digital side of that, and I've definitely been very aware of the fact that storytelling is certainly artistic, but there is very much also a science to it. And I can even extend that back to where to my father, who actually taught. He's a professor, and he has a strict set of rules of how to write. That my sister and I were taught, as well as all of his students are taught. And it's quite scientific, to be honest with you. it's quite scientific to be able to follow. If you learn certain rules, it certainly helps with clarity and messaging and telling and getting that clear story through, which unfortunately today has eluded, I would say, a lot of folks, right? I mean, I think that I see it time and time again, especially in the technology area, where companies really struggle to escape the buzzwords and tell
The
really
buzzword bingo.
what they do. Um, it really is a struggle for folks. But and maybe I've answered my next question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, which is, for the clients that you work with, when you're talking about this funnel that you've developed, why is that important today? How are clients using that?
Well, the clients that I focus on now, or I've been focusing on more lately, are IoT, smart home, and consumer medical devices. And the reason is because consumer medical device, smart home, and IoT have a device, an app, the cloud. It's a very complex system. And in my past, I used to invent this stuff. So I intimately know exactly where things could go wrong. And funnily enough, like, there's a pattern, right? But one of the most important things about storytelling is you have to meet the prospect, the customer, the advocate, like where they are. So they're always in different stages of their either knowledge, their ability to want to buy, or how they're feeling about the product. And so when we map this all out, and this is, I specifically did this because hardware companies, the ones that you ship a product, you get an app, you've got the cloud, you've got to log in. That whole process, that whole onboarding kind of process, that whole education process is very poorly done now. And what we found is that if you lay out, okay, this is how I want this experience to be, this is the story I want my potential prospects to hear, how I want to tell it, you start to see a lot of these gaps. But more importantly, you think, oh, how am I going to make this easier for people? How am I going to make it more enjoyable? How's the onboarding process going to be so fast that they'll say, wow, that was so easy? And then they'll say, hey, you got to try this, right? Because the ultimate marketing, the ultimate, anything related to promotion is word of mouth. That's the highest ROI. It's the strongest. It's the most loyal. And so why not build a process, a framework to get to the ultimate end goal, which is like, everyone says this is awesome and they want to buy it, right? So
yeah, I mean, everybody needs that. It's a real struggle for companies, and I'm glad that you've spent the time to develop something like that for folks and take them through that. So I mean, when you're working with companies on developing this story and really kind of, I'd say, extending the legacy of what you've been working on with JSY, and also, I'd say, probably drawing from the work, the entrepreneur ethos, the principles that you started there. What's giving you the most joy these days? What's making you happy?
well, I mean, I just love trying to figure out like how to tell a better story, especially in like new technology. I mean, I'm kind of a geek at heart, right? I just love gadgets. and it's interesting. I have a love-hate relationship with gadgets. There's times where I'm like, oh, gadget, gadget, gadget. Then other times I'm like, what are all these idiot gadgets doing around that don't even work? So really what's interesting, was giving me joy right now is, so, I have a fiance now, which I'm so happy about. And she has a daughter, 11-year-old daughter, and she loves to read. And she really loves to read. Like, she probably reads more books in a month than most people read in probably a couple years. Like, she just loves to read.
Wow.
And so we're starting to write together, and we're writing stories together. And it's really cool because she's like Harry Potter fan, Scooby. I mean, showing her Scooby-Doo, all those little things from our childhood. Like, she's watched Scooby-Doo, she's watched the Brady Bunch, she's watched Magnum PI, like all the, like, the cool, like the best storytelling in the world, obviously. Well, no, I mean, it's just funny, it's just fun, right? But, we we really, it's like really fun to not only, teach her about story, but learn what she likes. But the broader sense of this is that feel this like obligation now. What really does give me joy beyond that is teaching the next generation coming up what I know. And
That's great.
honestly, my philosophy is if you've gone through something pretty horrible, or you've learned something, you've battled the dragon and came back with the gold, you better start telling people about it. And you may think, oh, who am I? And I'm not some famous person or whatever, but believe you me, there is someone out there that's either in the similar position that you were in, that's struggling to figure out how to not feel so alone,
Yeah.
and two, how to navigate this treacherous, challenge in their life. And even if you think, well, I really, I feel like, there's sometimes there's, this thing called, where you feel like a fraud, or you feel like an imposter, like, oh, who's going to, and just put that aside and start really writing your experiences. And for me, that's been the huge amount of joy. That's the reason why the story funnel exists. That's the reason why I'm like really.
I love that. I love that. I you brought all those shows and movies and back from the 80s. I remember when my kids were just a little bit younger than they are now, and I showed them a show that I remembered fondly, a movie. It was Walter Matthau, or is it Matthau, or The Bad News Bears? Do you remember The Bad News Bears? And
I love that one.
and we put it on, and about 5 minutes in, I'm watching this, and it's about this manager of this little league baseball team.
Yep.
He has a car filled with beers, and he's smoking constantly, right? Right. And there are teenagers smoking, and my kids basically just looked at me like, what is this? And I was like, oh, maybe we'll watch something else. It was a moment where a story, perhaps, and the what was correct, what was appropriate.
It was a different generation back then.
It was a different, absolutely.
I remember that movie fondly as well. I mean, yeah, it's so well. It's great because some of them, like the Brady Bunch, is like a great example of, when we watch the Brady Bunch, all like, when you're a kid, you don't realize this, but when you look at the Brady Bunch and you look at its story structure and you look at how it's written, and back then that was what, 69, 70, 71, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty progressive in terms of, oh, there's this man and this woman, they have kids, they have stepkids, like they're co-parenting together. I mean,
more progressive when you learned actually what was happening in the private lives of the cast.
Exactly, right? I mean, and so, but you just see this as this interesting, like, wow, like back then. I mean, even 8 is Enough was another one we saw a little bit of, where, if anyone that doesn't know, it's like they got 8 kids. It's a lot of kids, but yeah, when you look at those and you kind of reminisce and you see it through like someone else's eyes, which again is sort of what I'm trying to do, not just in my personal life, but my professional life. Hey, I've learned this stuff. What do you think?
Yeah.
Boy, it just opens your eyes. It's just such a, I don't know. It just seems it's so rewarding,
And
like
giving people the tools for that is, I think,
Yeah.
the key thing. So Jarie, I mean, when you're thinking about where your business is going and some of these projects that you're working on are developing, what is your hope for your future and your future plans?
Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to build up the story funnel as a product and services based business for training and whatnot. That within the next 3 to 5 years, my whole goal is I kind of want to get away from agency work, just because I really like product work. And I think that what I'm building here is something that could be beneficial to pretty much anyone that wants to tell a story. But, right now I'm focusing on the, hardware companies, like, Internet of Things companies, smart home, and consumer medical devices, just to sort of narrow down, like really get the process, squared away. I mean, it's the process I've been working on for the last 4 years. So, I know it works. And I know that hardware companies, it's hardware because it's hard, excuse me. And so, if I'm going to make it all like work for that, and, all the challenges of hardware, and then, see how it goes. But I'm just really excited about it because it takes in all the things that I've learned throughout my 30s and 40s, right? I always tell people, like, especially younger entrepreneurs, I said, look, I learned a bunch of stuff in my 30s and 40s, and my 50s, it's all going to pay off. And it's going to pay off. It's going to pay off by me building on what I know, building these products and services that I can help teach the next generation. I'm like, the whole reason why I do the podcast and have written the books, or, obviously even written the memoir about Jane and I's experience about her during her treatment through leukemia. It's important. It's really important. If you're in a position where you know something, you need to teach it. And a lot of people may be like, oh, easy for you to say, but you know what? It's really rewarding. And that's what I'm really looking for in the future, is just being able to teach people what I know. And more importantly, what I think is really great is that the story grid, Sean Coyne, he's really good at, like, going deep and explaining things. But what's beautiful is that he's built a community around him, sort of challenge back and forth, be like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Because, as an idea grows, I mean, this, even as a brand grows, they pivot. What worked yesterday may not work today, but the ones that survive are the ones that take in that great feedback, adjust, and then build a bigger community, right? That's my goal. And hopefully through, the entrepreneur ethos and the story funnel,
you can build that bigger community and really kind of help this evolve. Well, I mean, Jarie, it's been amazing to hear this stuff today, and I love the plans going forward. Happy 50th birthday! Congratulations!
You so much. I made it.
You made it. And honestly, I think that the thoughts of building this solution that will help other individuals, other entrepreneurs develop their stories more effectively makes a ton of sense and is a really needed solution. So congratulations on developing that. Jarie, it's been great to have you on UNCAGED today. UNCAGED is a show that provides a voice to amazing executives from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. Today we've had Jarie Bolander. Jarie Bolander is the author of The Entrepreneur Ethos. You can find him at the Entrepreneur Ethos podcast, actually. His company is JSY Public Relations, and definitely reach out to Jarie with all of these challenges as you're developing stories for the next generation. Thanks so much, Jarie.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Thanks for having me on the show.